We're going to now be defining a class with multiple dependencies. This is great for us working on our car class because a car can have multiple different attributes to it, and attributes are very, very important to distinguish cars. But they all kind of have the same skeleton, just different things about them. So we are going to look at this in our auto file. So we're going to work with multiple dependencies in one class. This gives us more complexity. It's really going to stress our knowledge so far. Other videos can be found in the playlist linked below the like button, as well as the code that we have so far. It's in the other videos, how we made this earlier on as well. We can create another component that's part of our car in the Java class that we are going to depend on. So notice how we have our engine. We've done this previously. Now we have our gearbox and our seats. We haven't touched our POM XML file. We're not going to be using the IoT device or IoT device bean configs. Those are old. We're not using the XML here that we might in the next video. We have our engine right here, just with getters and setters and constructors inside of it. We have our car, which we're going to modify. We have a new gearbox. We have a string type for the type of gearbox and the int number of gears, so the number of gears it has. And then this is going to have just getters and setters inside of it as well. Same thing for our seats. We have these variables, getters and setters inside of them as well. And then we also have a toString method for the gearbox as well. And then we are going to have a car bean config. However, we're not going to deal with this just yet. We're not going to touch our main either. So this one is specifically just going to deal with our car setting it up for now. So we've made our classes. Back in our car, which is where we are now, we want to configure the car. We're going to import and use a few different things that we've learned previously in Java. We have list, set, and we're also later going to possibly import array lists and arrays to use inside of here. Some new things that we're going to be adding is this right here. The previous variables are going to remain the same. We have a gearbox for our gearbox. We have a list string of notes, and these notes can contain useful metadata about a specific car. We have our set of seats. A set of seats is used because car can have one-to-many seats. Now our gearbox is a one-to-one relationship, so you can think about it like that. We of course still have our engine right here. Now we're going to comment out this constructor and instead replace it with this larger constructor that can set everything inside of here. We're going to leave our current setters and getters here. Now remember, we have this Autowire for our set engine. It's an engine Lamborghini, so we're just going to say that we're dealing with a Lamborghini dealership that also happens to sell Teslas, because I believe somewhere in here I wrote the car as a Tesla, but we could always change that later if we wanted to. That's actually in our XML file. We're not dealing with this here though, so that's just something that we can look at later. So that is for our Lamborghini with our setting of the engine. Now we're going to want getters and setters for our gearbox. Our set gearbox is the setter, and then we have our list, and then we also have our seats. Now for each of the setters, we're going to auto wire them to be required equal to false, because, well, car might not need seats. If you're risky, you don't need seats. I guess you could sit on the floor. Or some car might not have specific attributes. It could be like a very base model car. Or let's say it has some kind of weird other thing than a gearbox that pushes it forward. So all of these are false, meaning that we don't have to have a bean pass through here. We're going to look at beans later. We're just setting everything up here. So this sets our seat options, meaning I made a mistake here. This auto wire requiring it to be false should be cut and pasted right here. That makes more sense. And then we are going to have our toString method that prints all this right here. We commented out the other toString method that didn't have everything in it. So that's just going to be putting everything into our car. We can see that we now have this as 138 lines of code. We're expanding this. We're making it more complex to really test our knowledge. Now we want to configure the car beans and the rest of the beans it depends on. So we're going to do this in our XML file. Later, we're also going to be doing this in a Java configuration too. So in our XML, we have to make beans for our classes. So every time we have a class, we have a bean. Then we're going to look at the modifying bean for our car, since we have changed it now to include all other things that we want to account for. So remember our car, we have these different variables inside of it. It's not this one, this is our car bean config.java, which we are not looking at yet. We want to go into our car.java, and we can see that we have all these different kinds of variables in here. We have to change our XML to account for this. So let's do this. The first thing that we're going to want to do is we should have a car bean right here. Now this is old, right? We had these older variables that we're not going to be using anymore, but we're going to want to use these same variables on top of new ones. So we are going to be using these, but of course we have to account for all the new things like the gearbox, the seats, everything else that we have in here as well. So we can take this out and make a new one later. We're going to leave our engine bean. We're going to leave our engine Lamborghini as well. However, remember that in our car.java, when we scroll down here, we have a annotation where all we want is going to be the engine Lamborghini for our at qualifier. So this is the only one that's going to get used. I'm just including this in here so we can show that it's not going to get used and it's hard-coded to our engine Lamborghini. Next, we have our bean ID for our gearbox. It's a gearbox BMW, but we could always change it to Lamborghini. So we could do Lamborghini. And if we look at our gearbox, it's just going to be a gearbox in here, not a specific type. If we look in our car, if we scroll down, we can find our gearbox. We have Autowired required is false. We have our qualifier engine Lamborghini. Remember, the qualifier is only if we have multiple of like the same type, and then we want the specific name. We only have one name for our gearbox, so we're changing it to gearbox Lamborghini. We know for our gearbox we have two variables, the type and the number of gears. So of course we have to do the property name because it's the name of the property, its type and number of gears. We're going to get this from our class. We are going to title these as shiftable automatic and then an 8. Now for our actual car bean where everything goes inside of here. So we've taken care of our gearbox, we've taken care of our engine. Left is our seats and our car. And remember, inside of here we made a list in case we want to add like any notes about our car as well. So we're going to include that in here. So we have to have these variables right here. Notice how we're not making any references like we've done previously. That's all going to be handled with our auto wiring that we've done up here. And we've carried over into our car where we have our at auto wire for our setters. So coming down here, we have our variables. We're also going to have our property for the notes. Now we're going to have to extend this because inside of here we have a list, right? So we can't just have property name notes and assign a value for it. There's going to be multiple values, and so we have to do it like this inside of here if there's multiple. Same thing for our sets right here. We have multiple seat options, so we're going to have seat option 1, 2, and 3. Now we have to make beans for these different references right here, right? Because these are going to be values. The reason why they're values is because this is it right here. Internal combustion engine, 3-year service included. We're adding these into our list. But here, we want to have other things with our seat option 1, 2, and 3. We want to have the type, the name, and everything like that. So with our seats, we have type, heated, and color. So that's what we're going to include here. That's why we have to reference them, because we're going to have more inside of each of these right here. So we reference them and we grab them. We have 1, 2, and 3. These are all slightly different. So now once we've configured all of that, we can go back to our main and we can try to run this. If we run it, we're going to go through our default constructor, through the default constructor, and then through the default constructor. So we're going to keep going for each of these because each of them goes through our car multiple times, going into the default constructor because we have like multiple inside of here. What do we have? We have our engine Lamborghini, we have our gearbox, and then we have our car bean. So those are all going to go into our car. This way 3 times. We're going to set the engine in our car, and then we have the car obtained from the bean. So we can see we have our car type, price, all of that inside of there, and then we have gearbox is equal to, and then we have a gearbox inside of here. So we have our type and our number of gears. Then we also have our notes, internal combustion engine, 3-year service included, and then we have all of our listed available seat options inside of here. So that's a lot that we have right here. Now, what else can we do? Well, to make our XML smaller, there's one cool thing that we can do, and it has to do with our auto wiring. Well, because we use auto wiring, if we go into our car bean, because of our auto wiring, and we know that in our car, we have a set down here that's going to set all of our seats, this auto wiring right here, we don't actually need to have these right here. Because the auto wiring in our Spring IOC is smart enough to realize that, well, we have a set, we have three possible things that can be interset: seat option 1, seat option 2, seat option 3 for our car's seat options. For that, we can just add them all in there. It's going to do it for us. So all we need to do is take this out. We can cut it, come into our main, we can run this again, and we're going to see that we get the exact same output. So that's how we would look at our XML. Next, we're going to look at Autowiring Collections using a Java configuration. We're no longer going to be looking at an XML file. We're going to now be looking at our car bean config.java. So instead of doing it in our XML like we've previously done, we're going to use it in the more favorable Java one that we're going to be looking at here. So in this Java one, we are going to have to do basically the same thing as XML, just a little bit different. We have to make sure that this is an at configuration here. Our car is going to remain the same. We're not touching anything inside of here. We're not using our gearbox. Well, we are using our gearbox, but we're not touching anything inside of here, nor are we changing our seats. Everything is left the same. The only thing that's changing is this and our main method. So we have at configuration, and we know every time that we want a bean, we have to prefix it with an at bean. And this is going to be called car bean right here. We make a new instance of our car so that we can put all of this inside of here. So we're setting all of these. We have an internal combustion engine. It is not a sedan. We'll make it a Spider. It's going to be an Aventador SVJ. I don't know if they made Spiders of this version, but it's going to be a Spider. We have a 3-year service included. Let's bump that up to 10 years just because that would be pretty nice. Our car price is $333,000, 3,000, just a bunch of threes right there. It's a big number. And then we have our set fuel economy 15. I don't know if that's exact, but it's probably pretty bad. It's the Lamborghini. And then we have our car.set notes. So we are just setting the fact that we will have notes in here. And then we are just going to return our car. So this is for our car bean. It's making that bean right here. Now, this is for our car, right? When we do this, we are going to also have all the other getters and setter for this. So we have what we've talked about previously. We have our engine. We also have our gearbox. We have our list. We have our notes. So we have all this inside of here. So we don't need to like connect these. The auto wiring is going to take care of that for us. That's going to be already done. We have our auto wire inside of our actual car.java. We don't really have anything inside of here. We just have our bean and configuration, and we imported an array list right here. So we have this array list. We've added everything in. Now moving on to our engine. We want to return a new engine where we have all this information in here. It's probably not 1,000 horsepower. It's not like a Tesla. We'll just say like 687 is a good number. Max RPMs, I don't know. We'll do 8. Max RPMs is 8. Displacement cylinder, we'll do like a 10 cylinder. That's pretty nice. Those sound good. And then we have premium lead for a recommended fuel. We are going to have a gearbox in here, shiftable automatic, number of gears 8. So basically it's just the same thing over and over, right? We have our at bean right here. This argument is if we want to change the name for it. Like, we don't really need this right here, but we do need this for like engine Lamborghini because we can see it's different from this method name right here. And that's the name that we're calling it inside of our car.java. So it all depends inside of our car.java. Note how we have this qualifier here. So it's only going to accept an engine Lamborghini. That's the only thing it'll accept. These other ones is just going to be get gearbox. We just have to have a bean for it. So back in our car config, we next have our seats. So we have our seat option 1, 2, 3, and I just added a 4th one here just to show that since it's a set, we can continuously add these if we wanted to. And we're just basically creating this instance right here. We're adding into it, and then we're returning. And this all happens inside of our car bean right here. So we'll go back into our main, and in our main, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to run an annotation config application context. We want to load the application context from our car config class, car bean config class. We're setting it equal to a new annotation car or config application context. And then we want to pass in the car bean config.class. So this is the one where we have all of our beans inside of it. So we're basically passing all of our beans inside of it here because it's an annotation config application context. We're storing it in this variable we're calling app context. And then we need to cast this to be a car because we are storing it as a type car. That's where all of our variables are inside of it. So that's how we can access it. So we do an app context.getBean, and we want to get our car bean. So our car bean, if we're looking at our car bean config class, because now that we have this app context, this get bean, we're getting the specific bean inside of here. That's our car bean. So this basically says, well, we want to use this car bean class. Okay, it's stored in here. Now we want to get a specific bean. That's called car bean. And that's stored in our car now. So now this car has access to all of it. And well, with that, we're going to print out our toString method because that's the default with this car right here. So if we run this, we're going to see we get default constructor, so it hits the default constructor. We have parameterized constructor for engine, so it's going to hit that. We have setting the engine in car, so we're going to set the engine there. And then we have our car obtain, which is from here. And then we can see all of our information for our car has been printed out successfully. So that is how we would do our car being config.java. Previously, we've just looked at XML. We have like timestamps in the description where you could skip around. But that's going to be it. Pretty simple, pretty easy. And this is again all from Skillshare. This is just what I'm taking from it. I found it super helpful.